Welcome back. Thanks again for joining us again for another episode. I'm glad you could be with us today as we have been studying for now a couple weeks through the book of 1 Samuel. If you're following along with us, we are going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 9. If you were here last time, you would have seen that we would have discussed the fact that Israel now demanded a king. Saul or Samuel, whether he was hurt, offended for himself or God, whatever came, and God made it clear they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me as God. It was God ruling through his prophet, and now they were going to move to a human king. And there's a list of things that were warnings to the children of Israel that will come with an earthly king, but they wanted to be like the other nations. So today what we're going to see, and here's a question that has been asked to me throughout the years. I've not been asked it a lot, but it is an intriguing question. It comes under the aspect of God's will. I'm going to say God's will, God's design. I believe that God has a perfect will, has a plan and a purpose for each and every one of us. And if we live in obedience, we will see it fulfilled. The question has come is, okay, if I'm going a certain direction and sometimes I don't do everything I'm supposed to, I'm not always in obedience, and I make a bad decision, whether it be for a moment, whether it be for a portion of my life, period of time, months or years, does that mean that God is done with me? I mean, as some people said, put on the shelf, that God no longer has a plan for me, and that it's up to you. Like he's got his perfect will, and if I step away, it's all over. And I've heard on some occasions it taught that way. There's some who believe that. I do not. I do not believe that, okay, we got God set and we make a direction that God just wipes his hands of us. Now, I will say this. There are going to be times, as we'll see today, that God has a design and a plan for us, and for whatever reason, in any part of our life, we decide to go a different direction. We don't do everything in obedience. Can we come back and still be used of God? Absolutely 100%. And what you're going to see here is God's design for Israel. His initial plan was supposed to be him ruling through a prophet, which really, through a priest, a prophet, which brought the most freedom to the people. They wanted a king. So he gave them what they wanted, but he was still engaged in this process. And that's what you see. Even though they ignored his original plan, he was still actively involved so that he can continue to bless Israel. And that's one of those strange things. You go through Scripture, the sovereignty of God, man's responsibility, the free will of man. Where do they meld? Where do they go? And you see here that this was God's initial plan, but he gave them what they wanted, but he was still actively involved in that. And that's an intriguing part. And what we're going to see here is we're going to see a story of the man who would become the first king and how God supernaturally made it to these two people. He and Saul would come in contact. So let's go to chapter 9 and verse 1, where it says, "There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zerah, the son of Bechorath, the son of Aphiah, a Benjamite, a mighty man of power." So this was a man in the tribe of Benjamin that was well known as a man of power, well respected, and he had a choice and handsome son whose name was Saul. There was not a more handsome person he among the children of Israel, for his shoulders upward he was taller than any of the people. So he was a good-looking man. He was a very tall man, and frankly, if you're going to use a king, this would have been a great opportunity because he would have given a presence of confidence that he was tall, probably athletic, strong-looking, handsome. He was taller than everybody, so he would have easily been seen as a great leader by his physical stature. Verse 3. Now the donkeys of Kish, Saul's father, were lost, and Kish said to his son Saul, "Please take one of the servants with you. Arise and go look for the donkeys." So he passed through the mountains of Ephraim and through the land of Shalisha, but they did not find them. Then he passed through the land of Shalim, and they were not there. Then he passed through the land of the Benjamites, but they did not find them. When they had come to the land of Zuph, Saul said to his servants who was with him, "Come, let us return, lest my father cease caring about the donkeys and become worried about us." Now, can I tell you one thing we see here? We see a man of power, but his son was a man of character. Look how many people, how many cities he went through looking for the donkeys. He had gone, really, as we kind of use the phrase from the New Testament, he had gone this extra mile. He had taken steps. He had been given instruction by his dad. He could have gone to the first few cities and said, you know what, they're not there. This isn't working. I'm out of here. He could have done that, but he chose not to. He kept going until he realized, all right, now we got to be concerned about what my father thinks and his welfare. You see a man of character. He didn't quit when it was easy or when it was hard. The moment it didn't work the way he wanted to, he kept going because he was given something. He kept doing it. So what you see is, at first, the man that God chose was a man of character from a home of character. And at first, as a king, Saul did a great thing. Saul was everything that he was supposed to be. And really later, as power came in, it changed, as we know often will happen in mankind. And so we do see, initially, Saul was. A lot of times you look at Saul's failures later in his story, you forget who he was when he was first chosen. Verse 6, and he said to him, look now, there is in the city a man of God. He's an honorable man, and that he says surely comes to pass. So let us go. Perhaps he can show us the way that we should go. And Saul said to his servant, but look, if we go, what shall we bring the man? For the bread in our vessel is all gone, and there is no present to bring the man of God. What do we have? The servant answered Saul again and said, look, I have here at hand 1/4 of a shekel of silver. I will give to that man of God, tell us our way. Formerly in Israel, when a man went to inquire of God, he spoke thus, come, let us go to the seer, for he who is now called a prophet was formerly called a seer. Then Saul said to his servant, well said, come, let us go. So they went to the city where the man of God was. And as he went up to the hill to the city, they met some young women going out to draw water, and said to them, is the seer here? And they answered and said, yes, he is here just ahead of you. Hurry now, for today he came to the city because there is a sacrifice of people today on the high place. As soon as you come into the city, you will surely find him before he goes up to the high place to eat. For the people will not eat until he comes, because he must bless the sacrifice. Afterward, those who are invited will eat. Now therefore go up, for about this time you will find him. So they went up to the city. As they were coming into the city, there was Samuel coming toward them on his way to go to the high place. Now, a lot of information there to simply say, as they came into the city, they're looking for a prophet, at one point known as a seer, someone that God would give. Remember, there was no Bible, there was no scripture. They would go to the prophets because the prophets would hear from God and give instruction. It was not the same as a psychic or something you would see today. Very, very different. It was really a servant of God giving wisdom. Different than even today. Preachers don't do that. We have scripture. We advise based upon scripture and scriptural principles. So they're looking for him, and it was customary to give a gift when they're coming. So they get prepared, they come, and by chance, if I can say that, they bump into each other in the road. And if you understand, God had told Samuel ahead of time Saul was coming, that the man who was going to be the king was coming. Let's continue on and see what happens here. Verse 17. So when Samuel saw Saul, the Lord said to him, there he is, the man whom I spoke to you. This one shall reign over my people. Then Saul drew near to Samuel in the gate and said, please tell me, where is the seer's house? Samuel answered and said, I am the seer. Go up before me to the high place, for you shall eat with me today. And tomorrow I will let you go and will tell you all that is in your heart. But as for your donkeys, they are lost 3 days ago. Do not be anxious about them, for they have been found. On whom is all the desire of Israel? Is it not on you and all of your father's house? So he identifies himself, clarifies who he is by stating to Saul, I know what you're looking for. That's been dealt with. And what you do is you begin to see God's sovereignty in play. This was not a chance appointment. God had made it happen. So basically, the donkeys disappeared for the purpose to get Saul into Samuel's presence, and so that Samuel could appoint him. Then he comes and says, you are the one. And he kind of dotes on him about, you're the one that all of Israel's been begging for or hoping for. And Samuel immediately says, Saul says, wait a minute, that's not who I am. Why would you say this? He says in verse 21, Saul answered and said, am not I a Benjamite of the smallest of the tribes of Israel, and my family the least of all the families of the tribe of Benjamin? Why do you then speak to me like this? So what you're seeing is a situation where these two men have come together. And Samuel begins to brag on Saul as you would be a man of honor. Now, here's another thing you see. You see that Saul was a man of character because in obedience, instead of quitting easily, he kept doing what he was asked. But two, you see Saul was a man of humility. He says, wait, why would you say these things to me? I'm a small tribe. My family's nothing special in the tribe. And obviously we know earlier from the beginning of the passage, his father was more well known than he's stating. He wasn't a man of arrogance. He was a humble man. So you see two things that I think God was looking for in the first king, a man of character, a man of humility, a man that would rely upon God. And you see that in these first few verses. In the first and 2/3 of this chapter, you see this in this man of Saul. So I'm gonna finish with this thought. When a lot of times you look at Saul, and we'll study Saul, and we'll see some great things Saul did. Later on, you'll see some really bad things. In fact, Saul went so far that instead of him having a dynasty and his sons ruling, the kingdom was taken from him and ultimately given to David, as we know that. But a lot of times what we see of Saul is the man who lost the kingdom, the man who chased down David, the man who failed God. And because frankly, there's more of that stated in the book of 1 Samuel than his character. But in this one thing, you do see a man of character. And can I tell you, I guess one thing I get from this, or one of the many things that I see from this is, we're all going to be given opportunities. We're all going to be given maybe trials that we can grow through, maybe opportunities where we can serve God and advance the purpose He's given to us. What are we going to do with the opportunities that have been given to us? Are we going to embrace them in humility, saying this is God has given to me, and honor God with them? Or are we going to look and see how those things can help make us look better? I am convinced, in almost 24 years of doing this job, growing up in the church and seeing people with some of the greatest potential not really ever do things for God, and seeing people with, shall we say, less potential, less natural talent being used greatly of God, that it has very little to do with the talent we've been given and more to do with our willingness to use our talent to glorify God. And that becomes the question. Are we willing to use what we've been given to glorify God? Or are we going to want it to be used so people can see us, for our betterment and for us to get the glory? God says, listen, if you get it on earth, you're not going to receive that praise in heaven because you've already received your reward. So I challenge to you is what God has given you, your character, your talent. When God gives you an opportunity, see it as that, an opportunity from God. Embrace it. Use it for His good, for God's kingdom. Use it for that. Embrace that. And allow it to be something where God can be glorified from it. And don't ever look at it as something, look what I've done. Always remember, I am just to be used of God. And may we allow, God has given us, may our character be one that always relies on God and desires to point people to God. Well, thanks for joining us as we continue to evaluate the book of 1 Samuel and unpack it. I hope it's an encouragement. Stick with us as we will pick up here tomorrow and continue through this book. Thanks again for joining us today.